These days in chess, openings are a very contentious topic. Even a badge of honor is not learning openings as late as possible. There's even some people that say you shouldn't even learn an opening until 2000 rated. Well, I'm here to disagree and follow the point of Daniel Arditsky, who says you should learn openings not as early as possible, but at a moment where your chess development and opening sort of principles has almost peaked. For example, 1200 ELO, you sort of know where to get your pieces out, get the knights out first, and throw them at enemy king to see what works. Once you get to that point, where you're not blundering as much and you want to sort of pick an opening you'd like, you can do that by choosing lots of different ones, playing them for a few weeks at a time. I think people also forget that your openings aren't fixed. It seems absurd to try and switch things very often and try and learn your same opening for a few months. That's sort of the typical thing. But I would say you can always hop around. You're not committed to any openings. I mean, I was an E4 player my entire career, and recently I've realized I'm really enjoying the English and the positions from there. So you don't have to play the same thing your whole life. And in fact, playing lots of different things can broaden your horizons. But here we're going to talk about how playing the same structure over and over again can really expand your understanding of chess in almost a contrarian way by learning theory and looking at model games. So in this first game, I'm not going to cover sort of the move by move analysis of why I made certain decisions, but I'll do it in the way of how I understand what the pieces should be doing from my looking at model games and my understanding of the positions and the pawn structure. So let's get to it. So in this game, or two of three games, I'll be playing the Sveshnikov Sicilian, and one game, well, the Kalashnikov, but it's basically ends up with a similar sort of thing. And what I'll be showing, even if you don't play the Sveshnikov or even the Sicilian at all, is you can take something from my explanation of the game and also how I use the opening and how I understand how my pieces need to play and what each of them should be doing. So in this game, we see the open Sicilian, one of the most classic openings in chess, and the Sveshnikov variation, which comes after e5. So here, the main line is actually relatively easy to find for players. It's not entirely theoretical. This move, knight to b5, is most players trip up. This is one of you maybe need to know, but I think after one game seeing it and analyzing it, or maybe looking at some pro games against Sveshnikov, you will know this is the main move in the position. Now we see d6 to stop the knight from landing on stop the knight from actually going to d6 with a nasty check. Now the square is defended enough times, and the bishop comes out to pin. And the key idea of this opening is control of that d5 square. And I know that this knight is meant to defend it. This bishop will usually trade itself off to try and win that square, and that's the jobs of these pieces so far. So I go a6 to kick this knight away, try to fork the knights with b5, trying to gain space on the queen side. This means maybe the bishop can come here in some lines, the rook can support, and you do start the minority attack already if the kingside attack is not available. So that's another sub-plan of the opening. See knight coming in. This is very natural stuff. Of course, you can't take because you will lose the queen. That would be quite unfortunate. Bishop to e7, solidify this knight. You don't have to get your pawn's double if you don't have to. This is already, I've had this position loads of times online and over the board. Players know their stuff and know to get into this line. So takes. You can take again, but why would you lose your best piece? So the bishop comes to e2, castles. I think white just castles here as well. Yeah, he does. So in this opening, the jobs of the pieces are very simple. You want to move this bishop to g5, try and free up the f-pawn for duty, and basically the f-pawn attack is the main theme. And if that doesn't work, as I mentioned, try and use the minority attack on the queen side. Those are the two ways to play. Here, I know that this bishop should either be traded off for white's dark squared bishop, or if I can get it out and try and use it to attack, control some key dark squares, that's useful. In some cases, you can even reroute it to this diagonal where it is extremely strong. Obviously, that will take a few moves and the right circumstances. Those are the jobs of the dark squared bishop. This knight will usually be used to trade off this knight, so that's the job of this piece. Or if the opportunity presents itself, especially after white plays something like c4 with the pawn, you can actually hop this knight into d4 where it will be a great piece, similar to white's knight on d5, but the main priority will be trading that off if I can do so. And the job for this bishop, it's more of a, not ugly duckling, this is probably the ugly duckling, sometimes they get stuck on e7, but you can get it out to this diagonal, you can try and trade it off, or you can stick it on e6 to exert some queenside pressures. That's what I'm thinking about so far. And first, I go bishop g5, the first port of call, free up the f-pawn for duty, and get my own counterplay started. I won't wait for my opponent to give me anything. I know what my plans are and how I need to proceed in this game. My opponent goes queen d3, connecting the rooks. Logical, the queen can maybe swing over, or it can just try and be supported by a rook and put a bit of pressure on this d-pawn. So f5, I waste no time. Now the queen is on this square, it's a bit easy to hit. This is not very complicated stuff. If she decides to take, I will just take back, and I have a good bishop, and these bishops are going to be very active, controlling the queen side, and I have attacking lines open towards the king side as well. So this would not be that great for white. I'm sure it's not losing, but why would you allow this if you don't have to? So my opponent's not decided to take. Instead, she goes f3, just blocking up that attack. Is very similar and actually a different opening called the King's Indian. So we see different themes just because of pawn structures. This is a classic kingside attack, and in the kingside attack, you never really want the pawn to land on f3. So that's why white plays f3, blocking that basically in perpetuity. So bishop to e6. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Now I'm out of theory. I'm just going to get my pieces out. This is contesting a knight on d5. The pressing issue now. I'm threatening to maybe take that in future, and also just getting my last minor piece off the back rank. Again, simple stuff. So c4. Now this opens up the knight coming to d4, but I don't really want to give away my whole queen side just yet. I don't think there's too big a reason for that. So instead, I go b4 and then a5. This wasn't the best plan. I could have actually just hurled the knight into d4 and sacrificed the queen side, but I didn't want to calculate that. It was too early on, and I think this is quite a simple plan and a way to resolve it, and it's usually the best in other lines that are quite similar. So this is something I'd seen in model games. I'd looked at loads of games on YouTube. I'd searched up Sveshnikov for games from Magnus, Nepo, and then Pohar Magsudlu in the Kalashnikov, just looking at loads of different things, the themes, how things play out, because even at a high level, you can still learn the plans and how the pieces should interact. Once you get a feel of that, you're really going to be doing well from analyzing your own games and also opening studies. So looking at theory, you might not even get the theoretical lines, but looking at what the pieces should do and looking at model games to get your middle game plans are just going to help you so much. So rook a d1 played, put a bit of pressure on this isolated d-pawn, and I know from my own study that the key sort of quandary white faces when playing against Sveshnikov is the fact that he can maintain a knight on d5 to exert some pressure on these key squares, and also towards the queen side as well, or he can try and attack the weak d6 pawn. But the problem is, you simply cannot do both at the same time, and each on its own is a problem that Sveshnikov player can handle quite well. So I go knight to e7, trying to trade off white's strongest piece. As we can see, her other pieces are not doing too great a job here. They're not doing too much. I think I'm holding all the chips in this position so far because I know what I'm doing, but my opponent is struggling to find direction in this game so far. She goes knight c to e3, but I'm just going to kick that away, winning tempo for my attack and forcing the knight from defending its brethren. So knight c2, I exchange off, and now, of course, she didn't want to take with the queen because that would lose the queen, so the pawn structure has to change, and now we see the battle lines are drawn. White must attack on the queen side, which is going to be relatively hard to win slow, and I must attack on the king side. I can move the bishop here, try and control some key dark squares, or I can use my heavy pieces to try and do more of the damage. That's what I try and do. So the bishop has to come back first, and then I bring the queen. In any f-pawn structure, it could be the Dutch, the Grand Prix attack, you know, if you play those openings, that the queen moving over and into the attack is usually a great maneuver, because otherwise the queen isn't doing too much, and also this will help me connect my rooks in future. The queen side's back. I think my opponent just wanted to defend here. I do something called the bad bishop bounce. This is a term coined by Daniel King, his channel I watched a lot to learn middle game themes in the Kalashnikov. He has so many videos. I think just find a YouTube channel that showcases a lot of the opening themes, or if there isn't one, maybe try and look at videos from like Gotham Chess, Agad Mehta, or other grandmasters going over openings in lectures or whatever. Just search your opening into YouTube and try and find model games to look at, or even go into opening databases and find good games from there. So I know if the bishop comes to b6, it's going to be an absolute monster bishop, because this diagonal, it's wide open. I'm making my opponent regret trading off her dark square bishop early on because she has no way to contest the dark squares. And after playing f3, it stops the advance immediately, but long term, weaknesses don't go away, and they might come back to bite you as well. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Bishop comes with check, nothing she can do about that. The king must move unless she wants to give an exchange, which maybe even could have been an okay decision, but then you're going to lose a long game, and humans generally do not want to give up material if they're going to be worse regardless. So I go rook to f6 here, bringing a rook into the game. Now the king is on the h-file. I'm going to bring the rook to the h-file and attack. It's very simple stuff. She's trying to get something going on the queen side, but it's a bit too little too late. The rook comes over. She goes bishop d3, which is actually a mistake, and allows checkmate into... I didn't actually find this in the game. The game ended horribly. I made another video about this, unfortunately. But the game should have ended rook h2, king takes, queen h5. This is not a chess psychology video, but I was very nervous in this game because I knew it was such a great game I played. I was so happy with what I was doing, and it's going to be my first win of the tournament so far, I believe. So the king cannot go anywhere. The pawn and the bishop with dark square control is just so good that the king is checkmated on the edge of the board. So this would have been a beautiful game. Unfortunately, I went on to lose. You can check out the other video to see how that happens. But let's go into another game and illustrate another example of how understanding where your pieces need to be or what their jobs are helps you win. So here's a similar game. This is in the Kalashnikov. A little bit different. You see e5 played a move earlier. Minor stuff. This is not going to change the game that much, but the theory is going to be a little bit different. This is not so explored, and I feel like black is a bit more flexible in this variation because obviously you're committing to something a little bit earlier. But we see the same sort of architecture for the position in the d5 square is very weak. I cannot even control that with pawns. I must do it with pieces. I have the open c-file and a pawn majority on the king side. As you can see, she has, well, my opponent is he. I don't know why I said she. He's got 3 pawns on the king side, and if there's any trade here, I'm going to have a majority. I think we do see that. So we see that, okay, I missed a few things here, but we trade. This is a structure very well known to Kalashnikov players, Once this pawn comes here, of course the bishop is improved, but after f5, that's going to be a bad piece and actually a target for my attack. So the knight has to go back, but it's only temporary. The knight can come back into the game quite easily, but this structure is forever. That's permanent. This pawn is slightly weak. That's not really a main thing, but the main thing is now a knight can never land on d5. So this is seen as a bit of a strategic win for black, because white's main feature is this d5 square, which now he has no access to. So h4, this is my opponent kind of misunderstanding the position a little bit. He just wants to attack me, but in the Sveshnikov, I'm the one attacking f5. And now we see I do have a 4-on-3 on the king side, and this pawn majority is going to be crucial in my attack. Now, he actually has 4 pawns on the queen side to my 3. So he should be attacking there, probably trying to use this c-pawn and a rook to lever open this and attack these pawns, which is going to be quite weak in the endgame. But that's going to take a while, and it's going to be much more careful than my attack, which I can kind of rush in a bit more, especially if my opponent isn't playing the most optimal moves and isn't making me think about the queen side. So g3, he wants to solidify his h-pawn. I go knight to d7, bringing the knight back into the game. Now my plan is just going to be e4, bring the knight into the middle, and then do some damage. That's what I managed to do. So bishop g5, my opponent kind of wants me to take, maybe just a little bit of hope chess or trying to trade off this bishop, which as we can see, well, as we have seen, can become very strong in the opening. But e4, the bishops get traded off because it wasn't doing too much from g5. My queen enters the game with a nasty pin, so I can't take this bishop for free just yet. He decides to block the pin, and I can't take because I would lose my queen. So I just go knight to e5, hitting that bishop, which now has to move. And the f3 square is up for grabs because of my pawn expansion. So knight to f3 check. The king is displaced. I think he probably should have ran to the queen side or castled queen side a bit earlier to avoid this. But again, it's going to be more typical Sicilian pressure. In most Sicilians, especially the open Sicilian, you have this open c-file, which you can use to attack the long castled king and moves like b5 and bringing your rooks in just to attack the king. You've probably seen that if you play the Sicilian yourself or in any modal games from Tal or Carlsen or anyone like that. He has to move the king over. I bring the rest of my pieces into the game, putting them on good squares. The attack continues with these pawns leading the charge, as it often happens in the Kalashnikov and the Sveshnikov. The knight comes back. I hit with a brilliant move, knight to h4. Not the hardest to find, but brutal nonetheless. Of course, you don't want to lose the queen, so the king had to go back. I open up the king to get my heavy pieces in. All of my pieces are fighting. These pieces are not very good, and because of that, I just have more material in the attack, threaten to win the queen. And now my queen infiltrates with check on the back rank, picking up a rook, but I'd probably be looking to try and checkmate my opponent here. And even if after I win the rook, the attack hasn't ended, this is going to be over, so in this position my opponent chose to resign. Okay, we'll end off with one quick example from a slightly different opening. Still the Sicilian. Okay, spoilers there. But this is the Alapin, a very tricky variation where white tries to take the entire center, but I know from my response, I want to do an Alakan style approach and kind of pick at the center from my own side of the board. So he gets this impressive center, but it's a little bit overextended. So d6, I'm trying to sort of poke a hole in his setup. And I managed to do that eventually. Well, he does it for me, removing this. So this is an IQP, isolated queen's pawn. And my idea basically is just to try and win this pawn and win the endgame. Unfortunately, because these positions can be quite drawish, I'm never worse here. I was actually better for some periods of time. Maybe I should have won this game, but I just basically, queens come off. I'm trying to win this pawn, but he does a great job defending it. And eventually this game was played to a draw because by the time I actually managed to win this pawn with some creative maneuvering to get the bishop there, he manages to get his own play, picking up this pawn with his doubled rooks. I come into the back rank, stop him from getting too active. Everything gets traded off, and eventually we agree to a draw in this very equal position. Of course, you could argue we could play on here, but I would say it was a double round. It's the first game of the day, and it's very easy for players, even much lower rated, to draw these sort of positions because with the king and pawn endgames, if the structure is symmetrical, you just have both pawns being the same. His king is even more slightly active than mine. That doesn't really matter. But yeah, draw was agreed. I cruised to a very easy draw where only I had winning chances because I understood how to play my opening. So there we go. What are the takeaways from this video? Try and look at loads of model games to get ideas of your openings. Don't be afraid to learn theory because even if you don't find the moves in your game, learning how the pieces should go and the middle game plans or what your pieces need to be doing can really help you in your understanding of chess and finding good moves that your opponents will not be ready for and also executing the typical ideas in your openings. So thank you for watching and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.